part of our Catholic Alive program, and we're going to have some great music tonight. We have a full crew over there tonight. Hope I get everyone because I can't quite see them all behind the sign. Jamie Russo is at the keyboard. John Reddick is there. Matt Nocera, Ashley Nocera, Miriam Shakely, Rebecca Shakely, Jordy Hamilton, and Sabrina Houston. Did I miss anybody? Good. I can come back next month for the semifinals.
Still calling.
When we begin our first song by everyone standing, we'll sing City of God.
You got it.
Awake from your slumber, I'll rise from your sleep. A new day is dawning for all those who weep. The people in darkness have seen a great light. The Lord of all longing has conquered the night. Let us build a city of God. May our tears be turned into dancing. For the Lord of light and our love has turned night into day. We are sons of the morning, we are daughters of day. The one who has loved us has brightened our way. The Lord of all kindness has called us to be a light for his people to set their hearts free. Let us build a city of God. May our tears be turned into dancing. For the Lord of light and our love has turned the night into day. Continue with the second song, We Are Many Parts. We are many parts. We are all one body, and the gifts we have
Thanks very much, guys. Terrific. We'll sing again at the end of our program. Please welcome from St. Paul Parish, John and Vicki Safran.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, Vicki. Hi. As he said, I'm Vicki, and this is John, and we have two kids. We have a boy, Alex, who's 12, and a daughter, Cassidy, who's 10. I have to tell you, a couple weeks ago, Father Harry sat down beside me at a school event, and he said, something to pray about. He proceeded to ask me if I'd give you all a glimpse into our lives as Catholic parents of a Catholic family, and to highlight some of the challenges and successes in our journey thus far in this day and age. Well, when he said something to pray about, he wasn't joking. I have been praying for weeks about this. I'm used to speaking in front of 4-year-olds as I work as a teacher's aide in Butler Catholic Preschool. So then Father told me, oh yeah, and you'll be opening for Father Kevin. And I thought, oh great, now half of Butler's going to be there. That's good. At any rate, here we are, and I'll do my best in portraying an honest and humble account of our journey thus far. I'd like to start with the challenges aspect of this retrospection. It seems to be the easiest to recollect since we are inundated with challenges every day. I think you'll all agree that everywhere you look today, there are messages in the media and society that completely contradict moral and Christian values. And well, this makes it tough on parents. To highlight a few, I'll begin with when we get in the car. We turn on the radio and immediately we have to change the radio station because of inappropriate lyrics or mature content. The kids are upset because they love the music, but we're not listening to that. They have our password, they have to have our password and approval to download any music to their devices so that we can monitor what they're listening to at all times. Another example is my daughter will turn on the TV sometimes. She'll change it to a family channel to watch a show. And a lot of the time, even though it's appropriate for her to watch, they're not respectful to the parents. They treat the parents like the parents are stupid, and I don't know about any of you who have kids, but I don't need help in being disrespected by my kids. I need help in getting them to respect us. Or sometimes, I let them watch a movie on TV, and it's the commercials that are inappropriate. Therefore, shows that are later on in the evening. Therefore, scary movies that my 10-year-old would have nightmares about. So she has to hold the remote control when she watches TV because she knows she has to change it on those commercials. Next, the internet. My son, a couple years ago, so he would have been 10 at this time, wanted to get an app on one of his devices. One of these apps was so that he could talk to his friends. It was a texting app. And I said, all right, well, let me look at it. And I did a little research on it, and here it's rated 17 and up. And I thought, why in the world is a texting app 17 and up? Well, here, I guess there's all sorts of inappropriate pop-ups that come up while he's talking to his friends. So, nope, he wasn't allowed to have that either. We also have to monitor any texting from him because, you know, just in this day and age, I struggle with it a little bit because I feel like it might be an invasion of his privacy, but you know what, we're his parents and we see it as our job to keep him on the straight and narrow, so he's out of luck. Another example, we stand in line at the grocery store and the magazines at the checkout. Everyone's dressed crazy, the rock stars, the movie stars, and I just have to tell the kids, stop looking at that. It's not cool to look like that. It's not cool to say those things. Those lifestyles are not okay. And not in our house. So let me tell you, we're not trying to raise our kids in a bubble, but it is exhausting filtering their environment for what seems like all the time. The kids have access to a lot more information than we've ever had growing up, and sometimes our challenge is just to have them turn off the TV, turn off the radio, turn off their devices so that they can disconnect from that world and reconnect with us and with each other. Now, on to the successes that we've had. They're hard to measure at this time. They're only 12 and 10, but I've gotten a few bits of encouragement along the way. Like, for instance, when it's my son who changes the radio station in the car because he knows that it's not a good song. Or my daughter, when I'm in the kitchen cooking, I hear her grab the remote, change the channel. Another success would be our kids. Our kids have approached us and asked us to be altar servers, and my son begged me to join the JAL youth group. He loves giving back. And my daughter, I have to say, is better than me to remember on the first Sundays of the month to bring food to Mass for St. Vincent. One of my favorite successes, though, happens when we're at a restaurant and my kids remind us, don't forget to pray. So we all bow our heads and we say a quiet prayer before we eat. They're pretty good kids, but they're a work in progress, and so are we. You know, somebody somewhere said it takes a village to raise a child. So I thought it'd be best to let our village be one that supports our faith and supports the values we're trying to instill at home. We've enrolled them at Butler Catholic School, and this has allowed the kids to learn all throughout the day about their faith, prayer. They go to chapel mass, they celebrate sacraments together, and at home there's never a question or a fight about if we go to mass. We just go every week, no matter if we're on vacation or at soccer tournaments. We find a mass somewhere. Because being Catholic to us is not just something that we say we are, it's a practice. We have to live it, and we feel that our faith is the most important gift we could give them. At the end of the day, to say it's challenging to raise our kids, Catholic is an understatement. It's a commitment on both our parts to be vigilant in their formative years. We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we're trying really hard to teach them now while they're young what's right and wrong. And one of my favorite sayings I love to say is, I was the perfect parent, that is, until I had kids. I had it all figured out. And now I'm just getting really good at praying for the answers. In fact, this past Sunday, I was praying for the Holy Spirit to guide me in writing this speech here. And God gave me something, and Dave Malarkey actually touched on it. The second reading was from James chapter 2, verse 14. And I'll reread that section. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? And that resonated with me because ultimately, John and I, we have to lead by example. And if our kids learn all of this without our making a commitment to our Catholic values, well, then we're hypocrites. So we try and let our kids know the messages out in society are not the norm, at least our norm. I don't want our kids to continue to be desensitized by everything they see and hear because it's so commonplace, and we want them to realize they're not alone in their beliefs. Our kids are a blessing to us, and we're all responsible for leading them by example because in this day and age, if it's not us, then who? We're their first teachers, and sometimes it's an overwhelming but welcome test. To sum it up, we just hope that one day our kids go out in the world and they'll have a strong foundation of Catholic values and pass them on to their kids like our parents passed our faith on to us. Until then, we're just taking it one day at a time, and we're learning to pray often. Thank you very much for your time.
Wonderful thoughts, Vicki. Thanks for sharing with us. Thanks. Our featured speaker for this evening, when we planned our summer meeting to plan Catholic Alive today, and our hope was that we would be able to get Father Kevin to come back and speak to us, and he has graciously agreed to do so. And I'm sure that I share your feelings when I say I can't wait to hear him. Father Kevin Fazio.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. Wow, great to see everybody. First, before I begin, I don't want to forget that my parents both send their love. They're traveling this week and unable to come on up, and I know that they miss the opportunity to see all of you, and they miss the opportunity to be seen by all of you too. Especially my mother. Love being the queen mother of there for a while. And then secondly, I'd like to have the folks, I brought up some folks from St. Al's. Well, I didn't bring them up, they came up themselves. I invited them up here. Folks from St. Alphonsus that are part of our RCIA program. Either they're beginning themselves, and we've had one informal session with the folks, and maybe their sponsors are here. So if anyone from St. Al's, I know some of you guys are back, just stand on up. Stand on up, move in the back, St. Al's. So. I wanted to introduce them to this, and what a cool evening it is in my hopes of bringing something like this to Wexford at St. Alphonsus as we move forward. And we're having one, we hope, we don't have the radio station in Wexford like we have a radio station here in Dave Malarkey to go on and be interviewed on, which is just really advantageous. But we'll do our best to promote however we can. And actually our first one is on October 28th as well. So it must be a good popular evening. I can tell you that if the Pirates are in the World Series, I've already looked, that could possibly be game 2. And it would be an away game. It would be in an American League stadium, not in Pittsburgh. So food for thought for that evening. Yeah. And guess who the guest speaker is October 28th at St. Al's? So the title of this is Graceful Growth in the Spiritual Life. And maybe we will find that it's really not all that graceful sometimes. But I'll begin. It is almost playoff season. Pennant race, Pirates in a pennant race, so with a little baseball story that involves nuns. That involves Divine Providence sisters, as a matter of fact. Sister Nancy. So there is a generous benefactor of the Divine Providence sisters housed at La Roche, right on the same campus of La Roche College in the North Hills, that gives the community 20 baseball tickets to an afternoon game down at PNC Park. 20 baseball tickets, and Mother Superior says, okay, I'm going to go and I'll take 19 of the girls with me. Let's get out of the house. Let's enjoy the beautiful afternoon game down at PNC Park. So they're all excited. The girls are all excited, and 20 of them get in the van, 2 vans, and they get on down to the park, and they get in their seats, and they're loving it. And they got their like #1 finger foam hands waving around, and they're raving the Jolly Roger, right? They're just having a great time. They're enjoying themselves, and of course they find themselves sitting in front of season ticket holders. And the season ticket holders, kind of 2 gentlemen sitting with their arms folded, that just love to just do nothing but bash everybody and everything, don't like what is right in front of them. All right? Because the girls weren't really paying, they were just loving it so much, they really weren't paying attention to the game. They were just gibbering and jabbering, going on and on and on and on. And one of the gentlemen, disgruntled, says loud enough for the girls to hear, well, maybe I'll move down, maybe I'll go down to section 100 seats, and maybe there will only be 10 nuns there. Well, the girls hear this and they feel kind of ashamed, so they quiet down. Well, and then within the next 10 minutes, Andrew McCutcheon hits a home run. Everybody loves Kutch. His wife is Catholic, right? So everyone, they're going nuts. They know that his wife's Catholic, right? They go nuts. They're all excited. They're waving the big foam #1 hand again. They're all getting loud and boisterous again. And then one of the other guys that sits behind them says, you know, maybe I'll move down to the club level seats because there will only be 5 nuns down there. The girls quiet down again. And then about 10 minutes later, Neil Walker hits a home run. Neil Walker, he's from Pine Richland. I mean, he's a native guy. He is Catholic. They know that. They're loving it. They're all going nuts. This is great. They're wondering. They're loving it. They're going boisterous again. carry on and on and on, and then one of the other gentlemen says, well, maybe I'll go down to the Lexus Club seats. There will only be 2 nuns down there. And they quieted down, and then Mother Superior stood up, turned around, looked at them, and said, why don't you consider moving to hell? There are no nuns there. All right, that was a good laugh. This is graceful growth in the spiritual life may not always be so graceful. I'm loosely basing this talk on this book, which I don't have the covers. It's called Falling Upward, a Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life by Father Richard Rohr, which was given to me by a Butlerite. Is she here this evening by any chance? She's here. Given me by a Butler. Fantastic book, and I'm basing it loosely on this book. I highly encourage you to read it. It's a more mature reading. It's only 160 pages long, but it is excellent. All the quotes that I will read from this book all come from the introduction. I couldn't make it out of the introduction. All right, there are so many great little anecdotes and little quotes from this book. It's not a work of doctrine. It's not dogma. Father Richard Rohr is a Franciscan priest, lives in New Mexico. Okay, so there's room in there for you to disagree with some of the things that he says, and I have even notes in here where I question mark. Not quite so sure what he means by this here. But it is a psycho-spiritual look at the human person in relationship with others and with God, and how we grow. And how we should grow, anyhow, in those relationships, in the spiritual life. It is excellent. It is excellent. And that's one of the beauties. It's one of the beauties of the church, how the church is big enough, right, theologically, spiritually, for such works, for such contributions, to help us grow gracefully. And as I said, I'll point out some things here, how gracefully growing in the spiritual life may not always be so graceful, how we oftentimes learn far more from our losses than we do our victories, far more from our falling than from our achievements, far more from our sin than our sanctity. Think about that one. Learn far more about ourselves from our sin than our sanctity. His basic argument in this book is to present to the reader that there are 2 halves of life. And this is nothing new. This is not new terminology, but 2 halves of life. And how really it seems like most of us are living in the first half. When the first half is very necessary, yet not the end in and of itself, that there should be a movement or movements throughout our lives into what he calls the second half of life. I'll just read some quotes and how he argues that in the first half of life, and it's not necessarily chronological, okay? So that and I'll point out some examples. There are some 12-year-olds who live more in the second half of life than there are 84-year-olds. And there are some 84-year-olds that live more in the first half of life. At least moments. That in the first half of life we have, and I'll read it verbatim here, we have our focus on certain things, and he calls it building our container. We build that container for security, for purpose, for identification. But then in order to get into that second half of life, we need to take that container and use it, to share it, and allow others to be a part of it. So, first quote. This is Rohr speaking. I find that many, if not most people and institutions remain stymied in the preoccupations of the first half of life. By that, I mean most people's concerns remain those of establishing their personal or superior identity, creating various boundary markers for themselves, seeking security, and perhaps linking to what seem like significant people or projects. These tasks are good to some degree and even necessary. The world would be much worse off if we did not do this first and important task. So he's saying this is necessary to build when we are young. But, in my opinion, the first half of life task is no more than finding the starting gate. It is merely the warm-up act, not the full journey. It is the raft, but not the shore. If you realize that there is a further journey, you might do the warm-up act quite differently, which would better prepare you for what follows. People at any age must know about the whole arc of their life and where it is tending and leading. I believe that God gives us our soul, our deepest identity, our true self. So he references the true self. And how in order to reach and live the true self, we need to get into the second half. Our unique blueprint, calls our soul our unique blueprint at our own, and in quotes, our own immaculate conception. All of us gloriously conceived in our mother's womb. Our unique little bit of heaven is installed by the manufacturer, so the manufacturer, God, within the product at the beginning. We are given a span of years to discover it, to choose it, and to live our own destiny to the full. Holding this inner blueprint, our soul, which is a good description of our soul, and returning it humbly to the world and to God by love and service is indeed of ultimate concern. Each thing and every person must act out its nature fully at whatever cost. It is our life's purpose and the deepest meaning of natural law. Natural law is our participation in God's law. We are here to give back fully and freely what was first given to us, but now writ personally by us. It is probably the most courageous and free act we will ever perform, and it takes both halves of our life to do it fully. The first half of life is discovering the script, and the second half is actually writing it and owning it. I find myself, now since I've read this book, as I was reading it, now evaluating, where am I? And I find myself at moments being in the second half, and at moments being in the first half. I catch myself go, ooh, that was a first half moment. Ooh, that was a second half discussion, decision. And the same for other people. I find very, very much to be the case. And I think this evening I will go about having 3 sections. It won't be that long. Have 3 sections of, I'll start with a quote, either from a saint or scripture or Richard Rohr. And then I will talk a little bit about it, but more so give you examples of my experiences and observations with some people in my life. In Genesis chapter 2, we have the garden, right? The Garden of Eden. And there are 2 trees. Anyone know what the trees are? What the first tree is? The tree of life, and then the tree of knowledge of good and bad, good and evil. Okay, we have 2 trees. But my quote is not from Genesis. My quote is about behavior, which was from this morning, today's first reading, which was from St. Paul's first letter to Timothy. Beloved, I am writing you, although I hope to visit soon. But if I should be delayed, you should know how to behave in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of truth. That was the opening verse in today's first reading. You should know how to behave in the garden. And it seems like, for most of us, we live in that garden when we're young, until we reach around the age of 7. So that's why there's so much beauty and innocence in 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. A young mother just said to me this morning, Father, will you talk to me? I'm having some troubles with my children's behavior toward me. And I said, well, how old are they? 2nd and 3rd grade. And I said to her, well, they're starting to leave the garden. And she said, we don't have a garden at home. They're starting to leave it. That's the age. They're starting to leave the garden. And then she quizzically, there's not a garden at the school, is there, on the campus? There's not a garden. I said, no, they're leaving the garden. They're leaving Eden. That's the time. It's the time when they're really starting to leave the garden. And what did Adam and Eve do? They sinned. So that's about that time. So what do we do as Catholics? Around that time, we offer sacraments of confession, reconciliation, and Eucharist. And there's no more powerful symbolic gesture or action than confession and Eucharist. There's no more powerful sacramental grace. Graces that are received in those moments as well. So we give out communion to remind ourselves that we are in communion with the divine. And along with that, we are afforded these graces from God. It's beautiful because we start to leave the garden. Just last weekend, one of my sisters and my mom are still helping me furnish where I live. I still have boxes. It's just not a pretty sight. It's not ugly, but it's just, I don't want to talk about it. My mom and my sisters are helping me still to move it. And it was a Saturday morning, late morning, and my sister, this one sister, brought three of her children. The oldest is Maggie. I've talked about Maggie before. And she's 8 now. She's 8 now. And her younger brother, her next youngest brother, is Colin. And Colin is 1st grade. And they were goofing around in my office. I told Maggie to answer the phones if they rang. And when it rang, she chickened out. She had it all. She knew what she had it written down. She knew how to do it, but she chickened out. She'll get up enough courage to do it next time. She practiced beautifully. I mean, beautifully. She answered the phone far more cordial than most adults actually do when you call. So she'll do well. But her younger brother Colin was starting to goof around, and he did, I don't know what he did, but he was teasing her. And right away she said, "Hey buddy, that's confession material for you." So she made her first Holy Communion this past spring. And her first reconciliation, this past, right before Holy Communion. And I hear confessions at St. Al's from 12 to 1 on Saturday afternoons. So I told them, I'm going to hear confessions. You guys do whatever you want with my place. I don't, my furnishing capabilities, I don't have any of those. So do whatever you want. As I'm sitting in the confessional, about 20 minutes in, guess who walks in? I said, Maggie, your brother, you told your brother he was the one that should go to confession, and he's not old enough yet. And she said, no, I need to go to confession. I just feel like it's time for me to go to confession. Okay, that was a second half life moment for her. And she went to, I've never heard a family member's confession before until 2 weeks ago. And I heard her confession. And when she sat down, I go, "Are you serious? Do you really want me to hear your confession?" And she said, "Yes. I want you to hear my confession." So we see this leaving the Garden of Eden at a young age, but also beginning to recognize at a very young age the necessity to go back into communion through what we have as sacraments. It was really, really neat. Really neat. Verses, times in the confessional. When it comes time for the act of contrition, and this is what the priest hears. And I wait to make sure they're done. I don't know if they're done or not. I can't hear. I have no idea what they just said. Or even if it is audible, how people just rattle through it. Do we have any idea what we're saying? It's good to memorize those prayers and rote prayers, but it's only good for the first half of life so that we can take those into the second half and internalize them into our true selves. A far better act of contrition is simply someone saying, "Oh my God, I love you so much, I am so sorry, I will try to do better." It took 3 seconds to say that, 4 seconds to say that. It didn't take any memory. It came from the heart, but it needed to be learned at a young age in that first half while we're going in and out of the garden. Okay? That's what I mean, but I can hear confessions from 90-year-olds that are not as profound as 9-year-olds. And it's not totally the 90-year-old fault. Part of it is certainly the fault of those who taught those. And it's a wonder if you have leaders that are not living in the second half of life, how can you expect those who follow to be able to go into the second half of life? And I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. A Native American aphorism saying, "No wise person ever wanted to be younger." No wise person ever wanted to be younger. Rohr says himself, "However, we are a first half of life culture, largely concerned about surviving successfully. Probably most cultures and individuals across history have been situated in the first half of their own development up to now because it is all they had time for. We all try to do what seems like the task that life first hands us, establishing an identity, a home, relationships, friends, community, security, and building a proper platform for our only life. But it takes much longer to discover the task within the task, as I like to call it. What we are really doing when we are doing what we are doing. Two people can have the same job description, and one is holding a subtle or not so subtle life energy in doing his or her job, while another is holding a subtle or not so subtle negative energy while doing the exact same job. Most of us are somewhere in between. Furthermore, he says, when I say that you will enter the second half of life, I don't mean it in a strictly chronological way, as I mentioned earlier. Some young people, especially those who have learned from early suffering, are already there. And some older folks are still quite childish. He goes on at one point, I didn't quote it, but he goes on at one point to say how it is a shame when there are older people, elders as he calls them, and again I'll reference that a little bit later, who are so angry, who are bitter, like all the time. Now sometimes Folks suffer when they are older, physically, and it hurts, and there's pain, and it's hard for them to put a smile on their face. However, I'll reference some folks in my life who I've come across who do suffer, but there is this sense of peace about them because they're clearly in the second half. They've clearly moved throughout life. But it is a shame because we desperately need in our culture today those elders who have been through it, who can be examples for us on our journey throughout life. We desperately need it, and we don't seem to admonish them too much these days. It's all about youth. He's the youngest to win 4 major championships on the PGA Tour. That's what we glorify, teen idol. We're not glorifying the elders that are so desperately needed in our culture. I'm going to do some name dropping this evening. Some you know. Some may even be here tonight. I hope you're not embarrassed by it. It's only complimentary when we get to it. But some of you are my heroes. So I'm going to do some name dropping. And it's not because of anything I did or anything I am. It's a gift. These people in my life, it's all a gift. That I received this gift to come across these people and more. That I won't mention everybody, but do some name dropping here tonight. Back to baseball. Okay, I've had the fortune of meeting some. St. Alphonsus has Pittsburgh Pirate ties, which is neat. I'm gonna admit it, it's neat to have, especially when the Pirates win. If they lost, it wouldn't be so neat, right? So yes, they're winning, and we have ties. Neil Walker is from St. Alphonsus Parish. His parents go to Mass regularly, see them regularly. Mark Melanson, okay? His wife, he's not Catholic, his wife is Catholic. He leads the majors and saves right now, so he's like a good guy. Right? He's a good guy, right? His wife is Catholic. They have 2 children. I baptized the second one not too long ago. I got to baptize their second child, and she's pregnant with their third. Due in October, right in the middle of maybe the World Series. And when you go to a baseball game now, when I'm probably done going to Pirate games this year. I think I went to 5 so far. And when you're sitting in the stands and people are just reaming Mark Melanson out as he comes into the game. He always does this. Why can't he just get him out 1, 2, 3? He always does this. He's terrible. He stinks. I take personal offense now. Hey, baptize his boy. I'll probably baptize the next one that comes along. Okay, that kind of behavior, first half of life. Clearly. First off, if you're that wrapped up in a game, you got problems. All right, you got some problems. Right, you really do. Secondly, he's a man who's flawed, who is imperfect, and who is put into situation in games where he's expected to be perfect. Come on, just get the guy out. Like the other guy's not trying. Like the other guy's not a pro. Do you really think when he or any of these guys want to get in the game, they want to fail? Do you really think that? So I'm with people whose arms are folded going, he's terrible! He's gone through some tragedy in his life this year. Nobody knows about that. You haven't read about that. He's expecting a child in a few weeks. He's a regular man who has his flaws like all of us, who happens to be gifted with talents that have led him, and he's worked very hard to get to the highest level in his craft. That's it. That's it. These people that I've gotten to know just happen to be gifted with certain talents that the public sees more than the most of us are seeing. All of us here are seeing. Give the guys a break. But I'm paying good money. Who put a gun to your head to buy season tickets? It should be for your entertainment and to appreciate what these men can do. Your life shouldn't hinge upon whether Mark Melanson gets his 47th save or not tonight. And if he doesn't, he will go home tonight to his wife, who can't watch him when he pitches. She cannot watch him. So I said, Mary Catherine, why do you go to the games? And she said, well, the Pirates offer childcare. It's great. That is true, by the way. That is true. I'm not making that. They do offer child, so the wives get to have, the kids are watched for like 3 hours, a 3-hour break. Another gentleman I've been privileged to come across is Kevin Colbert, the director of, he's the general manager for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I married, I did the wedding, didn't marry his daughter. I did the wedding of one of his daughters, okay? So, Steelers aren't, if they're not doing well, Colbert, he doesn't know what he's doing. He can't draft the right players. Look at all the failures, the people in the talk shows and the newspapers. First off, they're way off. He's done quite well. He's been quite successful in his job. And again, if you're really that hung up on a game, you better look elsewhere in your life for some fulfillment from your faith and from your relationships. Kevin Colbert is a good, quality Catholic man, a decent and humble man who has a decent and humble family. First half is when we get so wrapped up in how the Steelers did in the first half of the game and in the second half. We need to move beyond that. Another huge example that I won't go into at all at length, but it is coming up on baseball playoff season. If anybody remembers in 2003, the playoffs, there's a gentleman who was a Chicago Cubs fan named Steve Bartman. He was the poor guy who did nothing wrong when a foul ball came into his seat in the front row along the left field railing. Puts his hand up, ball bounces out of his hand as the Chicago Cub left fielder was out there trying to catch it. The left fielder made a little temper tantrum because the fan got in the way. The Cubs went on to lose the game and the playoff series. There were a billion mistakes that were made by the pros, by the ones who are getting paid millions to simply field a ball at shortstop, throwing wild pitches. Yet what did the people do of Chicago, a lot of them? They made that poor man's life a living hell. That man has never been seen since. He has had the opportunity to cash in millions of dollars to show his face. Millions. Tell me who's living in the first half versus the second half of life. That man clearly was able to move. And I don't mean just physically move. He had to physically move. But I mean in his heart and in his mind. He was living in the first half. He'd have taken that money and gone to a different country. Okay? Versus those poor souls who will be held accountable for their pathetic behavior. Right? In John chapter 13, Peter and Jesus have a dialogue. And Peter says, Jesus, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says, Peter, you are not ready to. Not now. Maybe later. But before that happens, you will deny me. John chapter 18. After Peter says, but Jesus, I will lay down my life for you. I will lay down my life for you, Lord. Jesus says, not now. John chapter 18. Jesus is arrested, and Peter's the one that gets blamed for slicing off the soldier's ear. And Jesus yells at Peter for doing that. So Peter has an exchange with Jesus where he says, I will lay down my life for you. Jesus says, no, you won't. You will deny me. Peter thinks he's doing good. He slices off a guy's ear. Jesus yells at him, don't do that, Peter. Put away the sword. Live, die by the sword. That's not what we're about. That's not what I'm about. Then Peter's nowhere to be found at the crucifixion scene. Not a good send-off for Peter. His last exchanges with Jesus this side of life, not exactly ideal. The next time that we have a dialogue between Jesus and Peter is post-resurrection. John 21. Post-resurrection, they're sitting by the shore, eating baked fish. And the next words that Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? 3 times. Do you love me? Throughout the gospel, this is the beautiful, beautiful example. Jesus never condemns the sinner. He condemns those who deny having sinned and who do not seek forgiveness. We learn more from our sin if we allow ourselves to learn from sin than we do our holiness. And that's how we grow in holiness. So we will fall. We will sin. We will fail. Rohr says, some kind of falling, which I will soon call necessary suffering, is programmed into the journey. All the sources seem to say it, starting with Adam and Eve, and all they represent. Yes, they sinned and were cast out of the Garden of Eden, but from those very acts came consciousness, conscience, and their own further journey. But it all started with transgression. Only people unfamiliar with sacred story are surprised that they ate the fruit. As soon as God told them specifically not to, you know they will. It creates the whole storyline inside of which we can find ourselves. It is not that suffering or failure might happen, or that it will only happen to you if you are bad, or that it will happen to the unfortunate, or to a few in other places, or that you can somehow, by cleverness or righteousness, avoid it. No. It will happen, and to you. Losing, failing, falling, sin, and the suffering that comes from those experiences. All of this is a necessary and even good part of the human journey. Even a good part of the human journey. St. Thomas Aquinas said, where sin is, grace abounds all the more. If we recognize it, and if we seek and receive, which we will, the forgiveness of our merciful God. Necessary suffering, it will happen. At St. Alphonsus, we host Alcoholics Anonymous meetings twice a week. Okay. And I am so humbled when I have a chance to stop down and be with those folks. Okay. They're broken people, and they admit it. And they're works in process. We all are. Vicky said it earlier. We all are. But they recognize their demons and they are doing their best to look at them head on, deal with them head on so that they can move forward. Because right now, there's an obstacle there. We all have them. It's just that these folks, it happens to be with alcohol. I find so much humility and beauty and grace there when I'm with them. I'm humbled by it. Richard Rohr says in this book, he prays for at least one humiliation every day in his life. One humiliation in his day, just to bring him down. To keep him humble, close to the ground. That's what the word means. So, it's a Sunday morning, and it's right before Mass, and I see some folks pull in and park in the fire lane right by the fire hydrant. The fire marshal of Wexford is in our parish. And he has gently said, hey, can you you want to keep that open? So, I go out 5 minutes before Mass. I say, excuse me, sir. Excuse me. And there's 3 people that got out of the car. Excuse me, sir. Do you mind? There are open parking spaces right nearby. Do you mind, if you need to drop somebody off, drop them off, but then just park in the parking spaces that are available, that are right here? Why? You're parking in the fire lane, and this is what I get. Far, so Western Pennsylvania. Far, not fire, far. There ain't gonna be no fire, for crying out loud. He didn't come into my communion line later on. Versus, and I'm no kidding, not a week later, I'm at an AA meeting, and our campus, okay, it's not no tobacco-free campus. It's a tobacco-free campus. It's a state law, actually, if there's a school, it's a tobacco-free campus. We have signs, tobacco-free, we just got them put up. However, right outside of where the AA folks meet, literally outside, there's a sign on the door that says, no smoking within 15 feet, which implies you can't smoke, but just outside of 15 feet. They've never been told you cannot smoke on campus before. I showed up at the meeting, and I was with them for a little bit. I introduced myself as the pastor, and afterwards, I said to the folks who were starting to light up at that time, I said, folks, this isn't totally on you. You haven't been made aware of this before, but I would ask that we refrain from smoking. Now, many drinkers are smokers, okay? So I would just ask that you refrain from smoking. We're really a smoke-free campus. And the response that I got was, I'm sorry, we're sorry, Father. Took it out of their mouths. We're sorry, Father. We'll do it. We won't smoke on campus. And the gentleman in charge said, I'll make sure as the weeks go on that anyone who does will call that to their attention. Who's in the first half and who's in the second half? The person who is broken, who sins, big time, very publicly anyhow, perhaps, or the fire lane, or fire lane. Who is moved, or who is moving? Prayer and elders, love and learn. Love must always expand. Love must always expand. We grow spiritually much more by doing it wrong than by doing it right. If we learn that love expands through all of it, all of our journey. And part of that needs to be in prayer. That as we journey throughout life, God willing, we have many years. We go from the 10 Commandments to the Beatitudes. And we look at how they beautifully work together in our lives. We don't stay stuck on one. We don't just look at the other. They're not mutually exclusive. Holy people are humble people. Truly humble people. Some of the people in my life who are truly, truly humble and holy are people, nothing seems to bother them. They just seem to be able to deal with anything. There's a young boy named Sebastian who I've just gotten to know who's 12 years old. Sebastian is the fourth of five children. His three older siblings are strong and athletic, and they're going to get scholarships to colleges someday. They're far superior right now to their peers. Sebastian was premature. He was this big. And his mom said you could basically see through him. He got the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck too many times in his mommy's womb. And he's endured 20 to 30 surgeries already. And he's facing numerous more. He's going blind. Okay? He has a hard time carrying on conversations. He needs help in school, but you would never know it when you meet the little guy. When he comes up to communion, he's got a big smile on his face. All his braces. Big smile on his face when he comes up. His parents say, Sebastian, you're the strongest one of all of us. Wasn't supposed to live. The doctors told him when he was an infant he had cystic fibrosis. They were wrong. He doesn't know it yet, but he's in the second half of life. Many moments when he comes up with a big smile on his face to receive communion, that's a second half moment for him and his relationship with Jesus Christ. Receiving communion to be in communion and live communion as a 12-year-old. He's gone through suffering. He's gone through pain. He's gone through failure. He continues to go through that every day of his life. That's why Rohr says it's necessary for us to recognize that, to be able to move to the second half. So those that are younger, that seem to be in second half or live in second half moments, are ones that have suffered or that suffer. We only hope that we can learn from them and grow. Some of those elders in my life who have lived lengthy lives. Father Lester Knoll. Some of you know him, I know. Nothing seems to bother him. Now, when he does weddings, he doesn't always do them like correctly as a priest. He's all over the place, right? But it doesn't bother him. It's a Capuchin Franciscan, whatever. Whatever. My late friend, some of you knew him, Father Bill Wheathorn. Another Capuchin Franciscan. Maybe it's something about their spirituality. I think it is something about their spirituality. Pope Francis. Nothing seems to rattle him. He's free. It's because he's free. He's free in his spirit. He's free. Father Bill Wheathorn, when he was lying on in his hospital bed, his cancer was terminal, said to the gentleman, the priest who was going to be the celebrant and homilist at his mass, he said, well, Bill, what do you want for the funeral mass? And Father Bill Wheathorn said, well, I want the prayer card to have my picture on it with me smiling. Which it did, it was a big smile. And it says, rejoice with me as I enter into life. Exclamation point. Rejoice with me as I enter into life. And then the priest said, well, Bill, what else do you want about the Mass? And he said, whatever. When we grow into the second half of life, we become less concerned about how other people perceive us and more at peace with the people we were created to be. We become more peace with ourselves. We become more at peace in our relationship with Jesus Christ. We become more at peace in our relationships with others, but less concerned about how we are perceived. Finally, my second half of life, Butler. I did a wedding up here during this past summer. And I had literally 2 minutes after the wedding to visit somebody. I had to get back to Wexford. So there was Harry Leyland sitting on his porch right down the street. Okay. So I go up to him. Harry, I got 2 minutes here. How are you? How are you? And I'm not coaching basketball anymore. Where's Aunt Louise? Where's Aunt Louise? And he just motioned. Nobody else is here. No one else is here for me to say hello to. So I literally have 2 minutes. I got to get going. Tell Aunt Louise I said hello, and then I stopped by. Okay, for those of you who don't know, Harry can't talk. And I'm telling him, tell Aunt Louise. Which made no sense, but at the same time made all the sense in the world. For a few reasons. Number one, my grandfather, my mom's dad, suffered a stroke when I was in middle school, and those who cared for him and loved for him the last 9 years of his life on earth, they were able to communicate. You could figure it out. So I knew, and plus then you just knowing Harry, he'll figure it out, and knowing Louise, she'll figure it out. But it doesn't make any sense to say, tell Louise that I was here. I got a note in the mail about a week later from Louise. It said, Father Kevin, when we came home, we thought there was a major tragedy, a catastrophe. Something happened. Harry was going bonkers, trying to tell us something, going nuts. We thought, oh my goodness, what is it? So we're asking, okay, something. Okay, finally we got St. Michael's Church. Yeah. We're asking more questions. One of the priests came by. Yeah. Naming the priest. No. And he keeps on pointing towards St. Michael's, which is pointing south. Going this, going this. And they're still guessing names and priests and other people. And we're not, no, it's going like this. Father Kevin came by. And he went, oh, of course. How couldn't you understand that? That's second half. That's second half. In relationship with each other and with God. Right, Dutchie Angeloni. One of the most beautiful funerals that I've been a part of. Beautiful. Remember that his viewing right across the street was on a Wednesday. And the funeral mass was on a Thursday. Okay? It takes prayers and it takes elders, like I'm going into right now. These are perfect examples of prayers and elders that we need to learn so that we can move. He was laid out at Martin's from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Long stretch. We have an adoration chapel right there. Whose time slot on Wednesdays from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Whose car was parked right outside the chapel from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. before she went over to be with her family after the death of her husband. That's second half. Francie. That's prayer. That is saying, my Lord, I need your help, and you are so important. You are the most important person to me in my life, so that when I'm going through this time in my life, this time of loss, this time of suffering, this time of pain, I can do it. Because of you. That's beauty. I'll take that with me for the rest of my life. And all of those examples in your life of those elders who show us that Jesus is number one in our hearts, in our minds, and in our lives. So that we can journey from first to second half and teach those to do the same. I'll finish with a quote from St. Bonaventure. This is from the 13th century. God shows no partiality. He does not take account of nobility of birth, length of time in his service, or the number of our good works. What counts with God is a devout soul's increased fervor and more ardent love. He does not consider how you once behaved, but what you have now begun to be. Let us pray. God, our good, loving, and merciful Father, you bring us together on this Wednesday evening as your loved sons and daughters. We journey throughout this life, giving you thanks for every opportunity to love you and to grow in that love. I ask your blessings upon this beautiful community here. My friends, my family here in Butler and Wexford and all throughout, who are a gift to me, your gift to me, our gift to each other. May you bless us, keep us safe this evening, so that we may have a restful night and wake again tomorrow to praise and worship you in hopes of reaching your eternal kingdom where you live and reign with Jesus your Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
Thank you. Love you all.